Boxing philosophy is about understanding. For example, how does Holyfield land his left hook? How does Canelo land his left hook to the body? And who owns the best jab in boxing? These questions, they open doors. They push us to explore the different elements of the sport, whether it's the punches, the timing, the rhythm. And there are also less visible layers, whether it's the glove size, the contracts, the psychology of victory, the psychology of defeat, and the unique environment that each trainer builds. Question: what truly makes a great trainer? Is it the strategy that they design, or is it the culture that they create in the gym? Boxing philosophy is about asking sharp questions, even when there are no clear answers. Because in the search for answers, understanding grows. So Crawford's retirement, that's been in the news now for a while. Now I think when we think about great boxers, we all have different memories. Me personally, when I think about Crawford, I think about the Errol Spence fight. Now Errol Spence to me was a great fighter. I know some people like to minimize that victory because of the car crash, but Errol Spence had some really great victories, and he definitely was someone that was bringing strong opposition. And I remember in that fight, I remember the dominance, and in particular I remember in round 2, Terence Crawford from the southpaw position, he threw that reverse 1-2, so it was like the straight left and then the straight right to cause that first knockdown, and it was just so meticulously planned. The timing was great, and also you had that punch creativity. And then I think of in round 7, there was that, again he was in the southpaw stance, and he threw that short right uppercut, and it was just a beautiful knockdown because he threw it, and as he was throwing it, Errol Spence was trying to get off his big right hand. Sorry, he was trying to get off his big left hook, because obviously he boxes from the southpaw position. And then you had that the next knockdown in the same round where you had that double right hook. Again, nice punch creativity, but the main thing from that fight was the dominance. The dominance was emphatic. He dominated a good, arguably a great champion. And to me, I have a really massive memory of that fight, because I remember that going into that fight, people were looking at it as a 50-50 fight. And of course, you had the Canelo fight. And to me, the Canelo fight wasn't just a boxing match. It was actually a massive cultural event, a huge cultural event. When you fight someone like Canelo, you're not only just fighting a legend, you're actually, if you can beat Canelo, you inherit the part of the brand, because Canelo is just, like, you could make a compelling argument, he's just a global superstar. He's known just not in boxing circles, he's known to casual fans. So Crawford, by stepping up 2 weight divisions, he was daring to be great. He was reaching for the stars. And in daring to be great, in reaching for the stars, he was taking a risk. He was compromising potentially his undefeated record to solidify his place as a great. And like I said, this wasn't just a boxing match. This was a huge cultural event. And I believe it was 41 million people watched that event. And that event and that performance by Crawford will live in many people's memory, because it was a beautiful performance. It was an absolute technical masterpiece. So I just wanted to address Eddie Hearn's perspective on Crawford. Now, Eddie Hearn has multiple clips with Crawford on social media. From an outsider looking in, they seem to have a very cordial relationship. Of course, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. Now, Eddie Hearn references many things. He talks about the power of bowing out on top. And if Crawford remains retired, he's retired undefeated. Now, Eddie Hearn adds this perspective that the retirement in some cases might represent a contractual issue, or it can create a financial incentive to come back because people would want to pay more money. However, this is all theoretical. However, he acknowledges that leaving the sport on your own terms is empowering, and it's empowering because many boxers carry on way too long. But here's a question that Eddie Hearn ponders: is Crawford the Mount Rushmore of boxing? Now, I did not know this, so I had to look into what the Mount Rushmore means, but from a practical, literal level, the Mount Rushmore represents the first 150 years of American history through the first 4 presidents. And when we talk about the original metaphor of this term, Mount Rushmore, it relates to an athlete being an iconic figure, which then leads to the question, what is an iconic figure? Well, an iconic figure is widely recognized and admired to an elite level. So according to Eddie Hearn, he says that Crawford is not on the Mount Rushmore level because his resume is not strong enough, and he actually makes 2 distinctions. So in simple terms, the 2 distinctions are this: Crawford has Mount Rushmore ability but not a Mount Rushmore CV. So a Mount Rushmore ability but not a Mount Rushmore CV, and this is his reasoning behind that. According to him, and many would dispute this, he states that his best win before Canelo was Ricky Burns. He calls Ricky Burns a good fighter, perhaps a great fighter, maybe one of the greatest Scottish fighters of all time, but not a pound-for-pound fighter. Now, there are so many questions with regards to Crawford in general, like how would Crawford do against a prime Floyd Mayweather? Would he be able to compete against a prime Manny Pacquiao? Would he be able to beat a prime Floyd Mayweather or a prime Manny Pacquiao? And then there's other questions like, is greatness just about resume, or is it about cultural impact, or is it a combination of both? Is it just about the boxing, or is it about the marketing machine, or is it again a combination of all those things? But I think in most people's book, Crawford is an elite level fighter, a great fighter, and most people will have him as a legend. So let's talk about the best fights from 2025. This is my personal selection. I think there's been some great boxing moments this year. So let's reflect, let's give perspective, and be grateful that these warriors have put it on the line. Now, boxing, of course, is entertainment. Boxing, of course, is capitalism. But boxing is also a sweet science. Let's begin. So with regards to my favourite fights of 2025, you have to put Bivol Beterbiev 2 as one of those fights. And it's important to acknowledge the context of this fight. One of the major contexts of this fight was how much of a dominant champion Beterbiev was and how he was destroying people. And there's 2 British references here that I can think of off the top of my head, which is the Anthony Yarde fight and the Callum Smith performance. Anthony Yarde, in fairness, put up a lot of resistance, but eventually was beaten. But the Callum Smith performance was chilling. It was a destruction of a good champion. I remember Callum Smith when he fought George Groves, and he was sensational that night. I don't ever think he's recaptured that form, but I was expecting a competitive fight, and Beterbiev simply just walked through him. And the one thing about Beterbiev is that he could throw short punches, like arm punches, but they would have devastating effects. So this was a boxer with elite level power. And when they fought in the first fight, it was a draw. When they fought in the first fight, I think, was it a draw or did Beterbiev get the fight? I can't remember. But what I remember was in the rematch, I think Beterbiev was given the decision. But in the rematch, Bivol actually started the fight not very well. And I remember in the middle of the fight, there was some concerns because it's like, well, Bivol needed a good start. And in that fight, it represented, you could break that fight into a few phases. The first phase is what I call the Matrix mode. And that's when you just go to elite level of boxing, which is a combination of various things. So an effective jab, effective movement, and predominantly Bivol used leg movement. He used effective head placement. He had a really nice counter jab. He really punched through the phases. He didn't allow Beterbiev in the second half of the fight to take control, because every time Beterbiev tried to take the initiative, he would respond effectively. And that was so essential, and it was such a brave thing to do. So on a technical level, it was elite. It was elite. But then you had the other element, which is the psychology of Bivol. Like I said, Beterbiev, when he just throws arm punches, they hurt. They can knock out great fighters. Yet because of his psychology, his stoicism, his composure, he was able to maintain his calmness and implement his plan effectively. And when you look at a boxer, you may see their abs, you may see their biceps, you'll see their jab, you'll see their boxing intelligence or lack of boxing intelligence. But you don't necessarily see what's inside, which is, some would call it their spirit, their essence, their psychology, their resistance. And Bivol is not only technically brilliant, but he's also mentally very strong. And I really enjoyed that fight. What a great fight that was. And I take my hat off to both warriors, because they both brought the pain. And it's like, for Bivol to accelerate to that matrix level, Beterbiev has to be such a dominant force. So that was one of my favorite fights of 2025. So another big fight that I really enjoyed, of course, was the Canelo-Crawford fight. And I think for me, this fight, like I've stated, was not just a boxing match, it was a cultural event, meaning that not only were the boxing fans interested, the casual fans were interested. And this is evidenced by the fact that 41 million people watched the fight, and obviously Netflix put their engine behind it. Now, the business and the capitalism element of the fight was interesting. The build-up of the fight was interesting. The ambition from Crawford was interesting. But what really got me was that when the fight actually happened, it was Crawford's calmness, his boxing IQ, where he was able to nullify his opponent, nullify that vicious right hand that Canelo has. And he has a vicious right hook, a vicious left hook to the body, and he nullified that. And also the importance of round 9. And in round 9, I felt that Crawford actually asserted dominance. He went through the phases and he made a statement in that round, and that enabled him to control the pace, to control the distance. And I just thought there were so many elements to that fight, whether it was Crawford's poker face, his ring IQ, his control, and also the fact that he fought exclusively from the southpaw stance, because Crawford has the ability to fight southpaw or fight orthodox. And this was an awesome event, and it was an awesome fight, not because of the competitive nature of the fight or that there was swing moments. It was an awesome illustration of technical brilliance. Another fight I loved was Inoue versus Raymond. Now, I believe it was round 2, but Raymond, he landed this great left hook counter. And what was happening, Inoue was going through the gears. He was starting to throw a combination of punches. And Raymond just picked his moment. He landed the left hook counter and he hurt Inoue. He really hurt Inoue. And what did this do? Well, it showed that Raymond was a confident competitor, but he was a confident competitor with a plan. And that execution of that counter was absolutely meticulous. But Inoue came back, showing his character. As usual, or as custom, Inoue starts throwing the 1-2s, but he can throw them at the target, but sometimes he'll start throwing them through the target. This creates more counter opportunities, but it also increases the opportunity for Inoue to get the knockout or to hurt his opponent. And Inoue actually started to use the counter left hooks as well. And he had some success with the right hand over the jab. So there was like the 3 moves that I could see that were really effective for Inoue. And Inoue was punching with just such hard intentions. He was just punching with so much passion and intention, but not losing his shape. Now, I believe in round 7, there was a left hook to the body. Inoue threw that left hook to the body, and I think that had that really hurt Raymond. That kind of took a lot of the fight out of him. And as fighters say, the body shots, when you've got the adrenaline, maybe you don't feel it at the time, but you definitely feel it afterwards. But I think Raymond really felt that shot. And then in round 8, the accumulation and the intensity of the punches from Inoue, it was just way too much. And he literally just punched through Raymond. And big respect to Raymond, because he really did bring resistance. And the lessons that we learned here was that Inoue, he can come back from disaster. That was a good knockdown, and that was someone who was passionate. And we learned that Raymond was a warrior. He was willing to put it on the line and to really give it his all. And even though Raymond had a good plan, even though he was a warrior, he could not deny the viciousness, the meticulous viciousness and ring IQ of Inoue. Of course, you have to mention the Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn 1. From a British perspective, this was the ultimate showdown. And here's a question. Was Chris Eubank Jr.'s ring walk one of the greatest ring walks of all time? I mean, that was epic. And also the fight had one of the best build-ups. You had the egg slaps, you had the confrontations, you had the inheritance of the father's rivalry, you had the rehydration clause, then you had the weight jump. It just had so many different chapters, and they were all organic as well. And effectively, you had this great marketing, but many fights have great marketing and then the fight is a letdown. But when they both got in the ring, you had two warriors putting it all on the line. And the passion from both fighters, from Chris Eubank Jr. and from Conor Benn, it was exceptional. They both were passionate and they brought everything to the table. And the last 2 rounds was just an absolute war. And it's commendable that, I know they got paid an awful lot amount of money, but just because you get paid a lot of money does not make you have character. It does not make you mentally strong. It does not make you a brave person. That was a choice. They honored their father's legacies. They put it all on the line and they really went for it. And it was just such an amazing thing to see them both just give it their all. And I think both parties deserve respect. And I think in hindsight, Chris Eubank Jr. left part of his soul in that ring. Arguably they both did, but I think that fight took so much out of Chris Eubank Jr. But that will stay in the minds of people for many years to come. They literally created history. Yes, many people said they traded off their father's names, but look at the event that they put together. The marketing, the machine behind the fight was amazing, and you could argue that the fight excelled expectations, and that was a great fight. Now let me talk from the British perspective. Now, one of my favourite British fights was the Callum Smith versus Joshua Buatsi. Now, for me, my introduction to Callum Smith was his epic performance against George Groves. And in that fight, he had one of the best left hook counters that I've seen. He was just so phenomenal that night. His sharpness, his power, his speed, his control of distance, he was really effective. However, going into this fight, he's on arguably the later end of his career, and he had a dominating loss against Butabiev. Now, granted, it was Butabiev, but it was a loss and it was a stoppage, and it was the first time, I believe, that Smith had ever been on the floor. So there was, concerns in terms of how competitive not necessarily how competitive could he be, but more about what does Callum Smith had left. And clearly he had a lot left. And what I really liked from Callum Smith is this fight. It wasn't just the jab, it was the work with the left hook. Now, Callum Smith, he throws the left hook short, and he had different variations of the left hook. Let me explain. So he would sometimes throw the left hook to the body and then the left hook to the head. That's a punch that Evander Holyfield used to throw. But then sometimes he would go left hook to the head and then left hook to the body. And then other times he might just double the left hook to the head or triple it to the head. So he had all these different variations of patterns with the left hook, which obviously makes it difficult to predict what he's going to do and makes it harder to block. Also, Callum Smith had, if I remember correctly, and I'm going off my memory here, he had a different trajectory with the right hand. So sometimes he would throw it short and sometimes he would throw it long. Again, when you throw the right hand short, it's easier to catch the counter. When you throw it long, it's easier to counter, but it can also create a knockout opportunity, or you give yourself more of a chance to hurt your opponent. So it's kind of like rolling the dice. And he would vary that right hand. And the variety of Callum Smith was really impressive. But Joshua Buatsi showed that he's a warrior. He's a real warrior. And in the 7th round, they went to war. And Joshua Buatsi took some really painful body shots. And fair play to him. He took the shots and he came back. And he set some traps in there. Joshua Buatsi, he was quite clever. He was setting traps. Callum Smith was setting traps. Both fighters, they showed ring IQ, they showed patience, they showed heart, they showed resilience. And basically, when you have two fighters that come to win, this is what happens. You have a great fight. And I believe that this was a really brutal affair, and it was really exciting to watch. I think also you have to include Manny Pacquiao's comeback against Barrios. Not that it was a great fight, but I think you have to include the comeback for me, because you've got to think of what Manny Pacquiao meant to the sport. For me, when I think of Manny Pacquiao, I think of the fighting, I think of the morality, I think of his character, I think about his humbleness. Specifically, I remember that the performance against Cotto, Miguel Cotto was a great fighter, and the way Manny Pacquiao respectively destroyed Cotto was elite level. It was on another level. And the way he battered Antonio Margarita, again, respectively, again, these were just elite level performances. And then obviously you had the performances against Ricky Hatton, against Oscar De La Hoya. Manny Pacquiao was just such a sensational fighter. He really was. And to see him in the ring, and to see him in the ring with Freddie Roach, Freddie Roach was his original trainer. It was the person, I believe, that discovered Manny Pacquiao and actually advanced him into being a boxing great. And to see them both together, and for Pacquiao to be at an advanced age but to still perform at a world championship level, it was just a delight to see, because Manny Pacquiao means so much to boxing. Of course, he's a legend to boxing. Well, he's a legend to the Philippines, he's a legend to boxing, and he's a legend to the world. And it was great to see him come back. And I know the fight was a draw, but many people thought he won that fight. So it was nice to see him come back and to be competitive, and just to see glimpses of that excellence. So I watched the Carl Froch and Andre Ward interview. I guess some may refer to it as a reunion. Now, Carl Froch is a former world champion, loads of credibility, and he also has an awesome YouTube channel. He understands how to do YouTube, and he's doing it really well. And obviously his credibility really helps. And he has really good insights and really good interviews. Now, when I think of Carl Froch, I think mainly of his boxing career. And I think of the Lucien Boutte fight. I mean, that fight was absolutely sensational. And people tend to forget that Lucien Boutte at the time was considered to be not only a good fighter, but going on to be a great fighter. Many people thought he was going to be dominant. And Carl Froch went into that fight, and respectively, he demolished him. He went in there with passion, purpose. He had a great game plan, and he just got straight to it. And Boutte just couldn't, he just couldn't handle Carl Froch that night. Carl Froch was exceptional. I think that's his best performance. Of course, you had other performances. You had the Lucien Boutte performance. That was a brutal fight. That was really a good fight. And I think Lucien Boutte I think Jean Pascal brought so much to the table that night, and he was a really game challenger. And that fight was exciting, it was entertaining, and I really do remember that fight. And then, of course, you had the 2 fights with George Groves, and both fights had great marketing, and both were great fights, because in some fights you have great marketing but not great fights, or you have a great fight but it wasn't great marketing. But in these 2 fights you had both. And of course, Carl Froch left the boxing game with that sensational knockout in Wembley. Now, of course, you have Andre Ward, and Andre Ward is considered a legend. He retired undefeated. And when we think of Andre Ward's career, well, he's flawless because he's undefeated. But one of the important exhibits for his career is to look at the Kovalev rematch. Now, Kovalev at the time, it's important when we define a boxer's values to look at the time. At the time, Kovalev was just walking through the opposition. He was a dominant champion. He won the title against Nathan Cleverly in Cardiff, and he destroyed Nathan Cleverly. And I think Nathan was undefeated at the time. He totally demolished him, completely demolished him. I believe in one of his title defenses, he actually scored a knockout with a jab to the body. He was a true power puncher, and he was a dominant champion. And when Kovalev fought Andre Ward the first time, it was a very close fight, and he actually put Andre Ward on the canvas, I believe, in round 2. But Andre Ward came back. It was like a fight of 2 halves. It was a close fight. Many people thought Kovalev may have done enough. But in the rematch, Andre Ward was exceptional. He came with a different strategy, and he really utilized an effective body attack. And I think he was the first one to expose that one big flaw in Kovalev, which was that he was really susceptible to body attacks. He doesn't respond positively at all to body punching. And Andre Ward was exceptional that night. He came with purpose, power. And when you think of Andre Ward, you think of that great defense. He had a great defense. He could nullify opponents. And that's effectively what he did to Carl Froch. And the one thing that I liked about this interview, or reunion, or whatever you'd want to call it, is the fact that Carl Froch accepted the defeat. Now, to give some background, there was a lot of ramblings behind the scenes for a long period of time where Carl Froch didn't seem to take full accountability, respectfully speaking. And there seemed to be maybe a bit of bad blood. Now, you never know how much of this is just for the public or how much of this is real. But face to face, Carl Froch took accountability, and he gave Andre Ward his flowers. Now, one of the negative narrative biases about Andre Ward is that he's a boring fighter, which is basically just minimalizing his great accomplishments. But Carl Froch acknowledged that he was a great fighter, acknowledged that he won the fight, and also acknowledged that the judges, that I think one of the judges or 2 of the judges had it close. He acknowledged that was bad judging, to put it politely. But also Andre Ward acknowledged, respectively, that there was a right hook to the body, or a straight right to the body, that Andre Ward actually felt after the fight. So it was a really positive exchange. And obviously both of these guys, they have great credibility in the game. They're both great champions. So that was a really nice moment to see. And it was also good to see both of them, because when you think about it, in this interview, they're both doing business, because you think Carl Froch has a very successful YouTube channel. Andre Ward has a successful YouTube channel. I believe both of them do broadcasting as well. So it's good to see that they're amicable, and it's good to see that they're actually doing business together. And it's actually good to get their perspective on what's going on in the boxing world, because again, both of them carry such massive credibility. And one of the things that kind of struck me was that they spoke briefly about the potential of a comeback. And when we're talking about the comeback, I think the context is maybe like an exhibition fight or something of that nature. And it seems to me that Carl Froch may be tempted to do a comeback. And I don't know how I feel about that, because when you look at his performance against George Groves, and this was a heated rivalry, it really was, and it was a sensational knockout, and he left boxing on such a massive high. I almost think, is it worth the risk to come back? Of course, Crawford has incredible credibility with his world championship status. You know, being a former world champion, he brings that credibility, and that credibility means that he would be paid sufficiently for his labor, for his work. But personally, it would be great to see Crawford come back and knock someone out. That would be brilliant. But I wouldn't like to see him come back and then suffer like a brutal knockout loss or get beaten up badly, only because he's not the fighter that he was. Because, you know, he's 48 years old, and age matters in sport, age matters in boxing, and age matters at the elite level. So part of me thinks, is that a good idea? But again, I think the emphasis here is that this was a good interaction. Both of these boxers, they left the boxing game on a high, and they're both involved with boxing, and they're both involved doing business in boxing, and they both seem to have their faculties intact. I also want to say that I like this new side of Crawford. I think Crawford has done really well as a YouTuber. I feel that he understands the YouTube game, he understands the algorithm, he understands that you have to be exciting and you have to create an edge, and, you know, saying certain things will bring in comments, engagements, and that's really vital for having a channel. So he understands that, and he's kind of like learnt the art of YouTube, and I think that's a great thing. But also I feel that there's a level of empathy with Crawford now, because Crawford generally was seen as quite like a brutal character. And I think he made a reference in the Andre Ward interview that a friend put a Bible in his hand or something like that. And that's not to say that he's religious, or that's not to say that he's spiritual, but he made a reference to that. And I think that there's definitely maturity, there's definitely empathy. And I think that you can see that in this new chapter of Crawford, you know, because you have the chapter of Crawford, the boxer, the chapter of Crawford, the world champion. And there's many chapters within that. But then you've got this new chapter of Crawford, the YouTuber. And now we're seeing a maturity, and we're seeing an empathy. And I think that this moment with Andre Ward really crystallized that maturity. And that was a good thing to see. So does Nakatani provide a serious threat to Naoya Inoue? Now, the first thing to establish is that Nakatani is a 3-time world champion and a former ring champion. So he has the credibility. But let's look at his latest fight and see if there's any clues or any evidence to see how he would compete against Inoue, who, of course, is a legendary fighter who is looking for other serious challenges. So is Junto Nakatani, is this a serious test for Inoue? So Junto Nakatani, he's a former ring champion, a 3-weight champion, so he clearly has credentials. So let's look at his last fight with Hernandez to see if we can get some answers. So I'll just go through some of the rounds. So in round 1, Nakatani is a southpaw, and he's punching hard from a very, very solid balance. He's actually touching with the southpaw jab, and it looks like that he's looking for counters, he's looking for mistakes. Now, a jab, straight left, and then right hook to the body shows that Nakatani has some smooth punching creativity. He throws the punches in combinations, and they're smooth. And what I've noticed, he moves with a very heavy stance, similar to how Picasso did against Inoue. And he uses the touch jab like a feint. So that was round 1. So we move on to round 2, and I'm noticing here that he actually feints with the left uppercut, and he's controlling the distance with that right jab. The jab is a very short trajectory. It's like from here to here. It's very short, and it's hard to read because he's putting it out there and then shooting it. The counters are very effective for Nakatani. A beautiful left-hand counter from Nakatani, which is just such a good trap, and it was implemented really well, and Hernandez just walked onto it. And the one thing I will say here is that I'm quite impressed with Nakatani's counterpunches. So now we're moving on to round 3, and Nakatani is now turning the jab, because he's jabbing from the southpaw stance, so the right jab is now turning into a short hooks, and he's throwing the hook like that. There's no swing, he's not dipping and throwing the hook. So there's a short trajectory. Now Hernandez is trying to put on more pressure, so as soon as he gets in the pocket, he just starts ripping shots to the body, which is a smart thing to do. It's good to invest into the body. Now some of this pressure is effective because Nakatani is actually giving ground here, and a left hook thrown from a wide position with his legs wide creates a different angle, and this is a really great counter puncher from Nakatani. So from dipping his legs wide and then throwing the overhand left, it creates this unusual angle. Now Nakatani is blocking, he's using head movement, and he's using his legs, so his defense is multifaceted, and so far I'm impressed. Okay, so let's move on to round 6. So Nakatani is changing the angles on the jab, really impressive, and he has a great left uppercut. It's short and it's really disguised well. Hernandez though is getting into the pocket and he's punching really hard to the body. Nakatani is trying to move Hernandez onto his left. He is throwing it hard, but Hernandez is just absorbing the punch and then going straight back to the pocket, so he's unable to control the distance. Here's a key point here. Hernandez's psychology is very, very positive. He's coming to win. And Nakatani is throwing hard punches. He's trying to go through the gears from 1 to 10. And he's also trying to incorporate some body work. And that's really impressive because he does have a good body punching resume. But Hernandez is so mentally strong. And the byproduct of that is that he's forcing Nakatani to work. So let's go to round 8. Now Hernandez again is forcing his way into the pocket. He's like a person that's possessed, and he's not allowing Nakatani to box comfortably. Nakatani is boxing, but he's not boxing comfortably. He's being forced back. Nakatani is walking Hernandez into left uppercuts, walking him into the overhand left when he dips his legs and then throws it from that awkward angle, but it's just bouncing off Hernandez's chin. It's quite remarkable. Hernandez, when in the pocket, he's putting the head on the chest, and what he's doing, he's throwing that short left hook to the head, and then sometimes he's going underneath, and then he's unveiling his repertoire, and he's really trying to put, what they call putting punches in bunches. It's impressive. Hernandez's output is making Nakatani uncomfortable. That's significant, and he's absorbing the power and throwing counters. So he's absorbing the power, but he's also throwing counters. Now, a right hook, left hook to the body was beautiful from Nakatani, but the fight is getting closer. It's getting much closer. So now let's move to round 11. And again, Hernandez's desire, it's amazing. His output is insane. He is just driven with real purpose. He really wants to win this fight. Hernandez has definitely raised his stock value exponentially after this one. Anyway, Nakatani is still composed, which is good, and he's still walking Hernandez into these punches. These punches should be knocking him out, really, or at least getting the distance. But there's so much significant resistance here, and Nakatani now has a closed right eye, which means he's going to struggle seeing the left hooks. And there's great exchanges by both men. Clearly, both men are passionate. They both want to win. They're both very committed. So there we go into round 12, and Nakatani is trying to close the show with his good angles and his impressive combinations. What Nakatani does well is that he actually moves Hernandez into a 4-punch combination. So he's moving him onto the punches, but Hernandez keeps coming forward. He just keeps coming forward. He just won't stop. Hernandez is coming with passion and that purpose of fighting, from a higher power. He's offering tremendous resistance, walking through the punches and returning fire. Nakatani is using his legs, he's using his head movement to negate the onslaught, but Hernandez's pursuit is absolutely ruthless. Now the fight ends, and there's clearly some things to learn from here. I would say that Hernandez was guided by passion and a higher power, and that shows the power of positive psychology. Now, in phases, Nakatani was good. He showed great counters, great combinations, an effective jab. He also showed, Nakatani, that he's not just an offensive fighter, but he's also a defensive fighter. So he, has good offensive and defensive responsibilities. And despite winning the decision, Nakatani showed some real heart. He had a closed right eye, which meant he could not see the left hooks. That must have been difficult. But despite this, he held his composure, even under extreme pressure. So he got the decision. Many people thought it was a very close decision, but he was successful. And in fairness, even though Nakatani won the fight, Hernandez has raised his stock. So in the post-fight, some are actually claiming that this fight was a robbery. From my perspective, this was not a robbery, but it was a highly contested fight. So with that, can Nakatani beat Inoue? I think he will provide a better test than Picasso because he's a better counterpuncher, he has more diversity with the jab, and he has a really short, a great short left uppercut. Inoue is a different style to Hernandez, so comparisons may be a little bit misleading. Nakatani is a good fighter with good weapons, and because of this, he could present some serious problems. However, based on that performance against Hernandez, you have to make Inoue a big favorite. So is there a scenario where Nakatani wins the fight against Inoue? I believe for him to be victorious, the following would need to happen. First of all, he would need to win the jab battle. Inoue has a great jab, but if he could win the jab battle, that would be significant. First of all, he could pick up points, pick up rounds, and it would set up his backhand, and also it would set up the counters. Another additional element for a Nakatani victory is if Inoue is unable to deal with the southpaw stance. Remember, southpaws are familiar with fighting conventional fighters, but conventional fighters are not familiar with fighting southpaws, so there's a natural advantage. So this could be significant, and some fighters, or most conventional fighters, struggle with southpaws. Another example could be that Nakatani may have a slight advantage with counters. He seems to be a very good counterpuncher. Assuming that premise is correct, he could use the counters to control distance, to reduce Inoue's punching output. He could even use the counters to maybe score a knockdown or hurt Inoue, which will enable him to control the distance, and therefore he can pick up points with the jab. Another element to Nakatani scoring a victory would be him moving Inoue onto the shots. Now this is going to be very difficult to do because Inoue is a boxer, so he moves you into the punches. So this is going to be hard to do. But if he can move him into the punches, particularly this overhand left that he throws, all he does, he bends his knees and he creates this unique angle for the overhand left. So that might be able to do something. But for him to win, he would need to dominate the jab battle. He would need to utilize his southpaw stance effectively. And I think he would have to outwork Inoue, but he would only be able to do that if he can get respect from Inoue with regards to getting respect from not necessarily taking the center of the ring, but landing significant counters that will say, look, if you commit to coming in, you're gonna get seriously hurt. And that type of strategy, if implemented effectively, will enable him to pick up points, cause decision fatigue, and he could have a really good chance. But here's the problem. Hernandez doesn't fight like Inoue. However, if Hernandez was able to walk through the punches, one may assume that won't Inoue be able to do the same thing? Another important factor to this fight would be the body punches. Inoue's a really good body puncher. He can throw through the front door, or he can set it up with the right uppercut and then the left hook to the body, or sometimes he'll touch you with the jab, throw the right hook to the head, and then come underneath. I think, again, for Nakatani to win, he would need to dominate with the jab, and he would need to get some body work in early as an investment to ensure that he can not only control the distance but control the pace, and to try and negate any surges from Inoue. From what I've seen, Nakatani is obviously a world champion. He's obviously a very high-level boxer. But like I said, I think from what I've seen, you would have to make Inoue the significant favourite. One of the important questions to ask here is, how big would this fight be? How big would it be, Nakatani versus Inoue? And from what I've been told, this will be a massive fight, a huge fight in Japan. And it would also be a fight that boxing fans all over the world would want to see, and even casual fans if they've ever seen Inoue fight before. I'm told that this may be the biggest fight ever in Japan. So it will be a Japan versus Japan mega fight. So the cultural significance of this fight from a Japanese perspective is absolutely massive. And as I've stated, clearly there's economy in this fight, there's money to be made, but also there's cultural significance and there's passion. And if you know anything about the Japanese culture, it's very, they're very honest and they have pride and dignity. And, both gladiators, both boxers would really want to win this fight. And this will be a fight that, everyone in Japan, or the majority of the Japanese public, would be tuning in. And this fight has so much potential in terms of, when we talk about currency, it's not just about monetary currency, but the currency of inspiration. Future Japanese boxers, youngsters who want to be boxers, particularly within the Japanese context, will look at this fight, and this fight will be an inspiration piece. And you can imagine from Inoue's perspective, closing his career or ending his career, or even if he doesn't end his career, to have this chapter where he has the biggest mega fight in Japan and to win it sensationally, that would really that would be, what do they call it, the Mount Rushmore achievement. And Nakatani will have an opportunity to really burst onto the scene, because yes, Inoue from a sponsorship and from a business perspective is huge in Japan, but he's also having a crossover appeal because of his exciting style. Casual boxing fans love his style, but also boxing purists love his style. So he has that. His branding, you could argue, goes beyond Japan. Yes, you can say his foundation is Japan, but he also will have fans all over the world. So this is a massive opportunity for Nakatani to put his brand against Nakatani's brand and trying to, really launch his career into having some greater cultural significance. Let's not forget that Nakatani is a 3-time champion and a former ring champion, so he brings credibility, he brings, world level championship contention to the stakes. But obviously Inoue is seen as legendary status. Arguably some people will put him top 3, top 2 in their pound for pound list. Some people will put him as number 1. So this would be a tremendous fight. The stakes would be high, and this would have potentially a tremendous cultural impact. So I really like this fight, and I would really look forward to it. I think Inoue would be the favourite, but Nakatani is a very worthwhile champion. He brings a lot to the table, and he has a lot of credibility. This would be a great matchup if it happens. I'm a recent Inoue fan, but Nakatani is also world class, and he brings a lot. He does bring a lot. If it happens, it's a legendary moment for Japanese boxing, and it's a great moment for boxing in general.